Stacy, welcome to the root of all success, man. I'm glad you're here today.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Well, so you co-wrote "She's Like the Wind" with Patrick Swayze, which
Right.
I think everybody listening to this show, if you're over 30, probably don't need any help in remembering that.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because I saw a video fairly recently of the equivalent of The Voice, and it's called The Voice Poland. And I saw an 11-year-old kid singing the song.
Really?
So it's incredible to me that it's so many generations.
Well, I was talking to, we're hosting this episode today at a law office here on Music Row in downtown Nashville. And I was talking to one of the ladies who her husband is the managing partner of the
Right.
firm. She said, well, her kids, even though they're 20 and 17, knew the song because she
Yeah.
was talking about the fact that you were coming in today. But she said she had mentioned it to another young person, and they had like, I've never heard that song before in my life. Like, how do you not know that song? Well, my question though is, that song, of course, became iconic. Do you remember the exact moment that you realized, wow, this is going to be a hit?
No, probably not until it became a hit. Although there were some rumblings. Because the interesting thing about Dirty Dancing was that before it came out, nobody expected it to do anything. The word on the street was that it was a bad movie. The production company, Vestron Pictures, this was their first foray into theatrical release. They'd only done home videos up to that point. So the plan was that the movie was going to be in the theaters for a week and then go straight to home video. And the soundtrack album was released mistakenly a few weeks before the movie was released, and it absolutely tanked.
Really?
And Time of My Life was released as the first single, and it tanked. Then the movie came out, and it was this sleeper hit where I'll never forget, it was number 4 on the box office when it came out. And normally things fall off rapidly. The next week it was number 2 on the box office. And so all of a sudden, RCA Records then re-released the album and Time My Life, and they both started to shoot to number 1. And the first inkling I got was Michael Lloyd, who had produced She's Like the Wind, called me, this is the fall of 1987. See, he called me and he said, hey, you're getting a gold record for the Dirty Dancing album. This is before my single was released. And I said, oh, that's great. I've never gotten a gold record. And I didn't know how it worked. I wasn't really in the record business. I was in the film and TV music business. And so I called him like a week and a half later, and I said, so when do I get the gold record? And do they send it to me? Do I have to pick it? What do I have to do? He said, well, you're not getting a gold record. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, now you're getting a platinum record. And I said, in a week and a half, it went from 500,000 to 1 million sold. And he said, last Sunday, it sold 280,000 copies. And his words were, we're riding the wave of something, and nobody knows where this is taking us. And he also had an inkling. When we did the recording session for She's Like the Wind, which was almost a year prior, I actually played all the synthesizers on She's Like the Wind. So if you hear it on the radio, that's me playing the synthesizers. It was my girlfriend Wendy singing at the end opposite Patrick. And of course, it was Patrick singing it, and he and I had written it. And there was a great band assembled to record the song with Lawrence Juber, who was the guitarist in Wings, and with Paul McCartney and all this. Anyway, before the session, Michael came up to me and he said, do you know what we're doing today? And I said, yeah, we're recording She's Like the Wind. And he said, no, we are recording a major hit song, mark my words. And I smiled, and I'd been in the business for a long time at this point. I said, Michael, will you call my mother and tell her that? Because I don't know if she necessarily believes that I was, can make a living doing what I'm doing. But he was right. And then once the sheer fame started to open up, like Patrick went to New York City. This was right after our single was released, and he was booked to sign copies of the single at a record store in New York City. And the article in the New York Times quoted a police officer saying, "I haven't seen this since the Beatles."
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's like thousands of people lined up.
So what was it like working with Patrick on that project? Was he really into songwriting, or was this something he said, "Oh, I want to help out with this"? What was that like?
Well, it was his idea to begin with. He and I were friends, and we were also neighbors. We met in his acting class and then discovered that we lived around the block from each other. I mean, 2 houses away. I was living with my girlfriend, Wendy, the singer. He was with his wife, Lisa. And the 4 of us started hanging out, and we were friends. And I had a background of doing music for dance and theater, and so that was a whole bonding thing. And I think it was the spring of '84, he was doing a movie called Grandview, USA, with Tommy Howell and Jamie Lee Curtis. And he called me and he said, "Hey, they're looking for songs for Grandview. I've had this idea for a song for a while now, but I can't get anywhere with it." He knew I was writing music for television. So he said, "Do you want to work on it with me?" So I said, "Yeah, sure, come on over tonight." See, he walked around the block with his guitar, and he had been in bands in high school. He also had a musical background on Broadway. He starred in the show Grease on Broadway. He had 2 chords, because I was sitting at the piano, he was sitting, or standing actually, looking at me, but he had lots of verses, like 4-line stanzas. And the first 2 lines that he had were, "She's like the wind through my tree, she rides the night next to me," which I found intriguing. And then I said, "I don't like the 3rd and 4th lines." And he said, "Well, what would you do?" And so I just said, "Well, nature imagery, she leads me through moonlight only to burn me with the sun." And he said, "What does that mean?" And I said, "I don't care, just write it down." And we moved it musically into some new places, me at the piano. And when we realized, I think it was a day or so later, that "She's Like the Wind" could be the title of the song and the hook, and not just the opening line, that's when all of a sudden everything kind of fell into place.
So you started composing, at 19?
19.
Right? So how did you know that this is what you wanted to do? Was that always part of the background, artistic? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I had started playing clubs professionally when I was 15 in a quartet, jazz, piano, bass, and drums, and I was on piano. I actually joined the Musicians Union when I was 15. And I was playing these clubs that served alcohol thanks to my father forging my birth certificate, or changing the date of my birth on it. So realistically, I mean, I still have it, and I can't believe that he did it. Anyway, but I got introduced to this little recording studio when I was in college, and I got into synthesizers very early also. So I had my own setup at home with a couple of synthesizers and a TAC 4-track tape recorder, and I was building soundtracks because of listening a lot to switched on Bach and electronic composers like Morton Subotnick and people like this, and pretty crazy stuff. And this studio, I got hired to write some library music for this studio with musician friends from college, and the studio started hiring me for more stuff. And I still, at that point, my career choice was still to either be a jazz pianist or session pianist or something like that. But it was actually my jazz piano teacher, Lou Stein, that at one of my lessons, I think I was 20, and I had been writing music for his jazz workshop as well. And after a lesson, he looked at me and he said, "You're a really good piano player, but if you ask me, your path is as a composer, because you do it easily, which a lot of people aren't able to do." He said, "And if you pursue it, you can make more money, you can get more respect, and you won't have to tour, which can be grueling." So on the drive home from the lesson, it was like the choir in the clouds singing, and I was like, "Oh yeah, he's right."
Yeah, isn't it interesting how one person's comment can change the course of your life?
Yeah.
Have you ever had that happen again or since?
Yes, in a way. This is around my first national credit as a composer. My girlfriend and I, Wendy and I, had the chance to submit a theme for the Richard Simmons show. And we got it. And we were told we had to, the producer had to like it, who was Wendy's father. His wife had to like it because she was the co-producer. The star had to like it, Richard, and the syndicator had to like it. He says, if all four of us like it, you got it. Otherwise, you don't have it. And so we got it, and I got the frightening phone call, we're flying you out here Thursday to record the theme. And I was like, wow, that's way out of my comfort zone. I was 24 years old. And with musicians I didn't know, in a city, you know, in LA and the whole thing. But that, I remember that first evening I was with Wendy and her father, Woody Fraser, and I said to him, I said, you know, I just want to clear up something. I said, I'm not here because of Wendy. And he just looked at me and said, you are here because of your talent. That's it. And I don't want to hear this again. And it's interesting because in a few weeks I'm going to his memorial service. Oh, wow. Specifically because of that comment.
You know, going from scoring TV, you know, movies to writing for Disney's Pocahontas 2 to writing with Patrick Swayze, what's it like to adapt between so many different genres of music?
It came fairly naturally because my listening was all over the place. I was absorbing, my father was a big jazz and classical fan. My mother was a big show tunes and folk fan, so there was this wide array of, I never knew what was going to be played in the house on any particular day. And then I got into rock and roll and more obscure modern composers and electronic music and things like this. So TV and that type of scoring work was a natural fit because if somebody said, hey, I need it to be this and this and this and this, so it's like, okay, I think I know how to do that. And I like the intellectual challenge of it also. When I was doing industrial shows for this little studio in Connecticut, there were times, I remember there was one, we were doing a show for National Airlines, and they wanted us to record You Are My Sunshine, but as a German Oompa band. And I had studied German in high school, so I actually translated into German myself and then arranged it for an Oompa band with tuba and clarinet and accordion and the whole thing. So I was kind of learning as I was going and developing this flexibility in how I was thinking.
Yeah, I would suppose that it's very similar to anything in business. I mean, if you know business principles, you can adapt to whether you're running a trash collection agency or you're running a law firm or you're running a sandwich shop. There are principles that apply, and you just make the changes. Is that a correct assumption?
Yes, and also, you know, do your research. Like you mentioned the Pocahontas 2 thing, that was a co-writer and I wrote the end title song for that. And they already had a songwriting team in place, but they just, for some reason, could not get the big ballad for the end of the movie, the rolling over the credits. And my agent had recommended me to the post-production producer at Disney, whose name was Bambi, which I couldn't believe. And so,
appropriate.
Yeah. So I remember I said to her, I said, you want me to call Disney and ask for Bambi?
Yeah.
She said, don't not make a joke out of this. So it was going to be a duet. She actually gave me the title where she said, well, it's John Rolfe, who's an aristocrat, and Pocahontas, a Native American, and they're literally sailing into the sunset, and it's like they've created a bridge between two worlds. And so I said, well, there's the title. And so she said, what? And I said, bridge between two worlds. We'll build a bridge of love between two worlds. So she said, okay, go with that. But myself and my co-writer, Blaise Tosti, really applied ourselves and said, okay, this is the Disney way of writing. These are the types of lyrics that they like. These are the chord patterns and melodies that they like. So it wasn't just like, let's just write anything we want. We were very, very specific about it, and we got it.
That's great. So what's the secret to maintaining a career as a composer in the music industry?
Besides alcohol, I would say you've got to embrace your fears, because they're going to be with you. Every creative person I've ever known is unbelievably insecure, myself included to the nth degree. But you've somehow got to overcome that. And you've got to still be able to put yourself out there and also challenge yourself and sometimes say yes to things that.
Let's take a quick break to thank our amazing sponsors for making this podcast possible.
I finally got it. It's the brand new Relay credit card. So check it out. I'm gonna do a little unboxing for you so you can check this out. So here we go. Nice little case, kind of like the American Express. You know, they're not playing. They're doing it right. Oh, look at this. There's a quote right inside. It says, "Success is having to worry about every damn thing in the world except money." Johnny Cash. That's pretty good. I've not heard that one. Oh, this is nice. A little thing on the back, up to 1.5% cash back, no annual fees or interest, 30-day billing cycle. And there it is. It's the Relay credit card. It's a Visa. So I'm not going to show you my number, but there it is. Look at that. Boom. Go to therealjasonduncan.com/relay.
Thanks for listening to our sponsors. Now, back to the show.
Right after you say yes, your brain is screaming at you saying, why did you just say yes to that? And the ability to ride it out. It's at times an incredibly satisfying business, at times an incredibly gut-wrenching business, because you're freelance. It's not, you know, the other secret is learning how to manage finances. Because you've got to be your own budgeter, you know, and know that, okay, maybe I've got this windfall from this project, but I'd better put some of this aside, not just for taxes, but also for maybe 2 years down the line when things are a little more lean.
Sounds like you have some personal experience with that situation.
Yes.
Yeah. Would you care to share a story?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, there were times where it was in LA where it was like, when am I going to work again? And then something comes up. But, you know, fortunately for me, I always had a pretty good team in place also. That's another secret. Yeah. If you are freelance, you've got to have people around you that you trust implicitly. Like I've had the same accountant for 42 years. And my old agent is still a very close friend of mine from William Morris Agency. And I always had a great lawyer. And I learned from them, and they also made sure that I was protected. Yeah. So it's just like any business where you build a team. But the difference when you're freelance is you are the product, you are the president of the company, and sometimes you're the sales force as well. Mm-hmm. So you are like a combination of various elements of business.
In 2015, you made a shift to getting into black and white photography. What inspired that transition? And then is it as fulfilling to you as composing and being in the music business?
Well, it was actually quite accidental. What happened was, well, first off, I grew up obsessed with old black and white movies. And I grew up in the days pre-cable. So it was when they were on television, that's when I would watch them. Like if Kiss of Death was on the $1 Million Movie on Channel 9, I'd watch it because it was great film noir and great camera work and all that. And the music, everything, I just loved it. And So in 2015, I attended a songwriting workshop in a villa right outside of Florence, Italy. And it was my first time traveling to Italy. The workshop was set up by a friend of mine from Leadership Music, my friend Lydia. And the leader of the workshop was a great songwriter named Gretchen Peters. She wrote Independence Day for Martina McBride, Bus to St. Cloud for Trisha Yearwood, just great writer. And she advocates writing by yourself a lot, which I wanted to explore more from the songwriting. Scoring work, I did a lot of work mostly by myself. Songwriting was always collaborative. So I wanted to explore, what do I have to say, just by myself. But about a week before, I thought, I'm going to be in Italy. I need a better camera than just the crappy little thing that I was using in my phone. So a friend recommended this Sony one-shot camera, which turned out to be medium price range, but excellent quality. And while I had it in Italy, I was playing around with it, and I noticed that it had a black and white function, high contrast monochrome. And I flipped it into that, and when I looked through the viewfinder, suddenly everything was an old black and white movie. And especially being in Florence with the architecture and then the people, I was suddenly, it's like I'm in a Fellini movie, I'm in this and this. So I had a free day in Florence, and I started wandering around with the camera, taking pictures of people instead of buildings. And there's a great photographer that lives around the block from me here in Nashville. And because I posted a few of the photos to Facebook. And he stopped me in the street. I was walking my dog. And he said, "Were you posting archival photos from Italy?" And I said, "No, if you mean the black and white. I took those photos." And he said, "You took those photos?" And I said, "Yeah, why?" And he said, "Well, they're really good. And now you need to bring a camera with you whenever you travel and do this." And it became a thing. It turned into, I did what he said. I went to Cuba, took the camera, and then finally I went back to Italy in 2018. When I got back from that, I had a couple of pictures printed out. And it's a pro shop called Chromatics. And the woman there looked at the photos and said, "Do you have more like this?" And I said, "Yeah." So she said, "Go buy a portfolio and start filling it up with prints because we think you're onto something." And I did, and that turned into me getting my first show at the Arts Company.
That's great. Well, I would imagine that composing music and photography is really about capturing emotion.
Yes.
Or drawing out emotion of the person engaging with the piece of art. What do you find easier to do? Is it capturing emotion through music or through photography?
Well, capturing emotion through photography is more immediate gratification, let's put it that way, especially in the digital world where it's, you take a picture and you look at it and say, okay, that's good, that's not so good. Music, it's so variable because sometimes you can work on something for 6 months and then it turns out well, or it comes to you like that. It's actually the show that I was nominated for an Emmy for, I wrote that theme, I sat down at the piano and I just played it. So I think both require empathy, that you've got to be able to think about what am I feeling and how does this relate to what somebody else is feeling and how can I convey what they're feeling and what I'm feeling at the same time. So none of it is easy, although it can sometimes seem so, but it's not.
What's your favorite photography? What's your favorite photograph you've ever taken, and what's the story behind it?
There's a couple. I took one fairly recently in June in Barcelona because I've been traveling quite a bit now. So I was in the Gothic quarter of Barcelona, which is the front part of the Gothic Quarter is this magnificent old cathedral, and then there were all these winding alleyways, all stone architecture with shops and little restaurants and all this, and you can just get lost wandering through there. So it was getting toward before sunset, but it was nice light. And I heard a singer, and then I heard a trumpet, then I heard a singer, then I heard a trumpet, and whoever it was really good. And I started following my ear, and I found this guy who was, as a lot of street buskers do now, he had a pre-recorded track that he sang over, but he was also playing the trumpet, so he'd alternate. And I stood there watching him, and I took a few pictures of him without him knowing. He never saw me. Most of the time, they never see me. And one of them captured both the photographic emotion and the musical emotion, because it's him singing with his eyes closed, with his head pointed up a little bit and his mouth open, and he's holding his trumpet. And the look on his face is of such passion. And he's standing in front of this stone wall, and there's a corner going around it, which gives you a sense of the depth with people out of focus at the end. And that's one of my, because I managed to capture both, the music and the visual in one photo, and happily that photo won an award, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, there's a curation site based in Stockholm called 1x.com, and it's like an online photo magazine with about 200,000 photographers from around the world submitting to it at any given moment. And I'd seen some photographers on Facebook that had submitted to it, so I said, I'll take a shot. So I had submitted a photo a couple of, early on, and it's a big deal if they publish one of your photos. And so this first submission that I did, which was a shot I took in Florence, they published. And then a few days later, I got another email saying, "You've won our award." And they said that less than 1% of their photographers win this award. So that was nice. So now I've had 35 photos published by them, and I've gotten 7 awards from them.
Very good. So what pays better, photography or composing?
Composing, by far.
So you've had a lot of leadership roles now. You've been on leadership with the Nashville Opera, leadership music. You even served as vice mayor of your neighborhood, Oak Hill.
Right.
So how's your perspective on success changed after being involved in civic leadership?
That's a very interesting question. I think the leadership positions change you in terms of you go in thinking you know everything, and then after a couple of weeks you realize, I know nothing, so I better sit down and listen to people and give people a chance to speak. And I think it opened me up more to what other people have to say and to be less judgmental, because I can be an awfully judgmental person. I wanted to write a self-help book one time called "I'm Okay, You're an Idiot." So
I think everybody has wanted to write that book at one time or another, because I think that's what everybody believes, right?
Yeah. So anyway, it's everything to me is about flexibility and the ability to improvise on the spot. And when you're in leadership positions, if you're too rigid in your thinking, you're going to be an ineffective leader. Mm-hmm. Because it means that if somebody comes to you with an idea that's very valid and you're just shooting it down offhand, that's not good leadership. So
what leadership lessons have you learned from the arts that you found most effective when dealing with civic leadership?
Well, I've had to conduct sometimes, which is frightening, very powerful, and humbling. In studio situations for some of the television work that I did, where I remember walking into a session one time and there was a string section there and I had done the arrangements, and the concert master was a great violinist in LA named Sid Sharp, and he took me around to the violinists and he was introducing me. He said, this person was the concert master in the Prague orchestra, this person was, just these unbelievable musicians. And then he turned to me, slapped me on the back, and he said, how do you feel? And I said, underqualified. And so you learn, yes, you've got to get your point across, and you've got to be the leader. You've got to be the one with the baton leading everybody. But if somebody speaks up and says, have you thought about doing the bowing this way or whatever, or this or dropping this an octave, and I say, okay, do it for me, and they say, oh yeah, that is better. Let's do it that way. So that helped me in the civic leadership later on. Of yes, I'm the one who's firmly in control, but at the same time, I'm not. First off, I'm not micromanaging, and then also I'm listening to what everybody has to say.
On this show, I've interviewed, out of the nearly 300 interviews I've done, most have been entrepreneurs. I think you're in the entrepreneurial space, certainly, because you, as you said, as a freelancer, you're your own boss, you're the product, you're your everything. A lot of entrepreneurs are the same way. They're owner-operators, and they're the solopreneurs, as we call them. But I know that you've experienced a lot of success, which is why I invited you to be on the show. But I want to know, from your perspective, what was your key to unlocking success, whether it was through composing and writing with people like Patrick Swayze, or whether it was doing photography? What's the one key that unlocked success for you more than anything else?
Sheer stubbornness. I would have to say that, and the ability to tune out.
Let's take a quick break to thank our amazing sponsors for making this podcast possible.
As an entrepreneur running multiple businesses, effective communication is critical for me. I've tried all kinds of outreach tools over the years, but none have compared to Dubb when it comes to driving real results, and that's D-U-B-B. I was one of Dubb's first users. I think it was like 7 years ago when they first launched, and I've been a loyal customer ever since. Dubb has completely transformed my prospecting, my client communication strategy, and here's why. Dubb makes it simple to record personal video messages and share them across email, SMS, social media, and more. And this brings back the face-to-face connection that's missing from most digital outreach. And what happens is my prospects instantly feel more engaged when they can put my face to my name. I end up building a stronger relationship faster by incorporating these video messaging into my workflow. Dubb also provides tracking and analytics so I can see exactly who engages with my videos and how they respond to them. Their automation and their CRM features help me nurture leads and close more deals. I mean, that's what we're trying to do, right, as entrepreneurs. So after using Dubb for years, I absolutely can't recommend them enough. I mean, Ruben, those guys over there are phenomenal. I love Darius. They're all great guys. It's become an invaluable tool that I depend upon to run my businesses efficiently. And if you want to boost your outreach and see amazing results like I have, head over to therealjasonduncan.com/Dubb. That's D-U-B-B, and you can try it completely for free. No credit card required. You get the first 50% off your first 2 months, by the way, if you use my link. You need to take your prospecting to the next level with video messaging from Dubb. They're my go-to sales communication platform for nearly 7 years and counting. Go to therealjasonduncan.com/Dubb. Try it for free, no credit card required, and you'll get 50% off your first 2 months as well.
Thanks for listening to our sponsors. Now, back to the show.
All the negativity around you, especially when you're going into a creative field. I sometimes have talked to classes as a guest lecturer, teacher, whatever. And I remember one class, I said, okay, before you start asking me questions, let me ask you a few questions. Who in the room wants to be a composer? A couple of hands. Who wants to be a songwriter? etc., engineer, whatever. And I said, okay, last question. Who has faced obstacles from your family based on your career choice? And every hand went up. And I said, that may be the number one issue that you have to deal with. Because especially when you start young, it can be family that's saying, obviously parents might want to be protective, knowing, oh, it's so competitive and it's this and it's heartbreaking and all this stuff. And then even worse than that is people that want to tear away your dream because they're thinking to themselves, what gives you the right to pursue your dream and be successful at it when I'm miserable? And I wanted to do this, but I let it go because everybody told me, oh, you can't do that. So you've got to be able to separate yourself from that and not let that rule your life. And to me, that requires stubbornness. It doesn't even require self-confidence as much as it requires just saying, this is it for me. I'll tell you a conversation I had with my mother once. This was after I quit college, because I quit college after 2 years. And about 6 months later, my mother said, I want to talk to you. So, all right, we sat down and she said, I think you should go back to school and get a degree in music education. And I said, why? And so she said, so you have something to fall back on. And at this point, I was like 20, maybe 21. And I said, oh, something to fall back on. I said, let me paint you a picture. Suppose I'm a tightrope walker, and I'm up performing on the wire night after night, and there's a net underneath me, which is something to fall back on. I will fall because I know I'm safe. However, if I'm up there night after night and there's no net, and if I know that if I fall, I'm dead, I'm going to stay up on that wire for as long as possible. And I'm going to make the best effort to continue to stay on the wire because I want to operate without a net. And I said, that's my attitude about that right now. And my mother, who was very funny, she looked at me and says, you're very literate. And it was, but she got it. And to me, that has stayed with me because you have to have that ability to operate without the net.
So how do you define the word success?
I'll know it when I feel like I've actually achieved it, because I just kind of keep going. I'm not one so much to rest on the laurels. That's kind of why the photography became a thing and all this. But to me, it's the ability to finally experiment and do what you want and to stretch a little bit. And also to give back to the community. When you're at a point where you can do good for, in my case, the arts community or, well, city government also, that to me is a sign of success, that you have the time and the wherewithal to devote your energy to something that's not necessarily paying you.
So by that definition, do you consider yourself successful?
Well, yeah, to a degree. I mean, I certainly had the leadership positions. Running for office was all I can say is was a trip. So going door to door and door knocking and the whole thing. So yeah, I'm pleased with that. There's always the voices in your back of your head saying, I could have been so much more. I could have been this. And I've been journaling, or not journaling, I hate that, but writing recollections. And one of them begins, these are the things that I've done in my life. And then I write, I'm not saying this to brag. I'm saying this because whoever is reading this needs to know that I'm unbelievably insecure, that I feel like I'm lazy, that I never lived up to my potential. And then I define the word potential as to what that means in terms of the power and all this. I said, but when I step back from it and examine it on a purely objective basis, I was like, oh yeah, I've done a lot. But it's like, it could have been this, it could have been that. So, but I think that that's good in a way because it keeps you from getting complacent.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you have a healthy self-awareness.
Yeah. Yeah, just ask my ex-girlfriends about that. So.
Well, so what's the best piece of advice that you would give to an entrepreneur listening to this show? You know, you're coming from a very different angle of entrepreneurship, but nevertheless, so in your experience of all these years doing so many great things, what's one piece of advice you would give to them?
I'd say it's something that I've also said to students, which is it's great to have focus. It's great to know this is where I'm headed. But it's bad to do that like a horse drawing a carriage with blinders. It's like the horse knows where it's going, but it can't see the periphery. And many times the best things in life are in the periphery. And so if you allow yourself to take that little side journey, sometimes things come out of it that you never expect. And so it's like, okay, this is where I want my company to be. This is where I want to be. This is what I want to be doing. Oh, you know, that's not out of the question. And that may actually add to my process. So let's zig a little bit and see where that leads. And it may lead nowhere, but that doesn't mean you can't get back on track to where you were before. So to me, that served me very well. I mean, I think about it, you know, an actor called me up in 1984 and said, hey, you want to work on a song with me? And my thought could have been, that's not in my plan. Or it could have been, an actor, what does he know about music and songwriting? Instead, to me, it was like, okay, let's see what happens.
So if you could go back to 19-year-old Stacy and give him one piece of advice, knowing everything you know now, what you've experienced, what would you tell your 19-year-old self?
19-year-old self. Don't be so afraid of everything. 19-year-old self, yeah, don't be so afraid of everything and practice more. I was a terrible practicer on the piano, so I wish that's one of those things where it could have been better. I wish I had practiced a little more, but also I think it would have been breathe, have a little more confidence in what you're doing. You actually know more about what you're doing than you think. Because I don't think people would have been hiring me back then if I didn't.
Yeah. All right, so now I want you to pretend you're writing the soundtrack to your own life. What's the opening track sound like and why?
What does the opening track sound like and why? Well, everything that I do, or my best work, to me has an element of melancholy to it, because it's like, you know, even She's Like the Wind has like a little wistfulness to it of like, she's out of my league, and, you know, things like this. So it definitely wouldn't be, well, it would either be that or the opening to Looney Tunes cartoons. So it would, you know, so, but probably something, I love melody, so it would be melodic, but there'd be a hint of wistfulness to it as well.
Songs that you've not written, what's the best song ever written?
Somewhere Over the Rainbow.
Really?
Yeah.
Why do you believe that?
It's fairly simple. The repetition of intervals makes it unbelievably catchy. It's a beautiful message lyrically, but the melody is just absolutely incredible. And the moment that she starts to sing it in The Wizard of Oz, which is a movie I love, it's like this movie has gone in a whole different direction now. It started off as this, fun thing with the dog and the awful woman, who wants to get rid of the dog, and Dorothy's in Kansas and all this. And suddenly that song just changes the entire trajectory of the movie. And it's also the wistfulness. Yeah. It's like, if bluebirds fly, why can't I? So it's, that to me is one of the greatest songs ever written. If we moved into more modern times, I'd say Thunder Road by Bruce Springsteen, which also has the wistfulness, and then there's a song that Simon and Garfunkel had a hit with, that Paul Simon, of course, wrote, called America, which, for some reason, when I was 12 years old, that song could always make me cry. And there's a line where he says, "Kathy, I'm lost," I said, though I knew she was sleeping. "I'm empty and aching, and I don't know why. Counting the cars on the New Jersey Turnpike, they've all come to look for America." It's like, geez, And what's also interesting about that song, as a side note from a writing perspective, not one line in that song rhymes. And that's really hard to do.
Huh. I'll have to listen to that.
I
don't guess I've ever paid attention to that.
Yeah, it's like, "Let us be lovers, we'll marry our fortunes together. I've got some real estate here in my hand." So we looked at so I bought a pack of cigarettes and Mrs. Wagner's pies. And it goes on like that. It never rhymes. And I've tried doing that. And it's like, how do you make it flow without it rhyming?
So what's a song you wish you had written?
Well, that one.
Besides those.
Yeah, besides those. Song that I wish I had written. It's funny, I don't know why this just immediately popped into my head. There's a song called "The Flame," and it was Nick, somebody or other, who wrote it, and Cheap Trick had a huge hit with it in the 80s.
I remember the song.
And it's a great power ballad. And I would just listen to that saying, this is such a well-crafted pop song. This is just so well put together. That song, and probably Dear Prudence by the Beatles, which is another one of my absolute favorite songs.
Well, I want to say how much I appreciate you being on the show. This has been an interesting look and a deviation from our normal conversations on the show. But
well, I'm glad to be the deviant.
yeah, but I think it's a cool inside look at a different perspective on success through the lens of someone in an artistic endeavor, but who nevertheless strove for entrepreneurship and creating. I mean, there's a capitalistic view of all this too. Obviously, you want to create something that's long-lasting and artistic, but there's also, hey, I got to pay the bills, and so I've got to create a business out of this. So thank you for sharing those insights. People can learn more about you at your website, stacywidelitz.com. That's Stacy, that's S-T-A-C-Y, and then Widelitz is W-I-D-E-L-I-T-Z, to learn more about you and perhaps see some of your photography as well, right?
Yeah, and they can also, best place to actually see the photography is on my Instagram page, which I use only for photography, not for food. And it's that's just at Stacy Widelitz.
Yep, follow him on Instagram at Stacy Widelitz. Well, Stacy, I'm going to give you the last word on the show today before we close out. So anything on your mind you want to share before we close out?
No, I guess because of the nature of this show is just an emphasis on when you encounter creative people, don't just think that, oh, they're airy-fairy types that, head in the clouds and they can't do math and things like this, which I really resent when somebody says, oh, you're a musician, you must not be able to do math. And I was like, I won an algebra award. And realize that we're business people also.
Yeah.
Brad Paisley went to Belmont not to study music, he went there to study music business. Anybody that's achieved a certain level of success in music business or any of the creative arts is also a business person and is thinking in terms of, how do I protect myself in terms of copyright ownership? How do I not become a victim of the system? And I would say that people on the strictly business side need to understand that a little bit more, and people on the creative side need to understand that in the business world, especially in entrepreneurship, that's an unbelievably creative endeavor.
Thank you for the insight. I
Sure.
appreciate you being on the show.
Thanks.
Attention business owners.
Attention business owners.
Feeling burnout from running your business? Uncertain if you're nearing burnout? Take our free 10-question business burnout test at businessburnouttest.com to discover where you stand. With just 10 quick questions, you'll learn how to immediately begin making changes to regain freedom and success. Cut your daily operations time in half. Improve your quality of life and prepare your business for your future exit without losing revenue or profit. Visit businessburnouttest.com now and take the test. Thank you for listening to another edition of The Root of All Success with the Real Jason Duncan. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, visit therootofallsuccess.com to access the show notes and other helpful resources. Follow Jason on social media at The Real Jason Duncan. See you again next time here on The Root of All Success.